Welcome to this very cerebral edition of Easy China. Today I would like to welcome Dr. Liu Chao, a principal investigator at the State Key Laboratory of Cognitive Neuroscience and Learning at the Beijing Normal University. Welcome, Dr. Liu. He's going to tell us all about the differences between the brains of native English speakers and native Chinese speakers, as this is an area of specialty for you. You've recently completed a study on that.
Yeah.
There's been a bit of a hypothesis thrown around, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, that sort of argues that we are what we speak, that our native language somehow determines the things that we're able to understand, and even to an extent, the way our brains are wired. Is this a fair way to put it?
I don't think Whorf goes into the brain. So he supposed that our cognition and perception determined by our language.
Right.
So it's because of the development of cognitive neuroscience that we now researchers want to look into the brain of English speaker or like Chinese speaker.
Because they are actually physically different. And when we do the same tasks, to put this very simply, different parts of our brain light up.
Right? Yeah. Not only when they functionally, when they light up, like the structure, there was a study even showed that the structure of the English speakers and Chinese speakers are different.
I'm very curious to know about this. So if you took a look at my brain, how would it be different? I mean, the brain of a typical native English speaker, how would it be different from that of a native Chinese speaker?
So there will be data show that even the structure, even the shape of a brain are different.
It's different.
So the Caucasian brain is like 10 millimeters longer than the
like
Asian
those
brain.
Beds in college.
No, just a bit longer. And the Chinese brain is a bit 15 millimeters wider than the Caucasian brain. So in general, the Chinese brain is more rounder. It's rounder than the Caucasian brain. But there's no particular reason for this. We don't have any explanation yet. So maybe genes, environment, or even like your sleep.
The way you sleep on your back, your brain gets smushed, you sleep on your side, your brain stretches?
But that's folk psychology. We have no science study on this one yet. But we know, indeed, the differences exist. And then for the functional structure of your brain, there was studies show that for the Chinese people, they have a little bit larger area in this left middle frontal gyrus, which is here. They have larger left middle frontal gyrus and the inferior temporal gyrus here.
Okay.
So
which are areas that are responsible for language.
For language, yeah, you know that.
怪不得. Chinese is such a complicated language.
That's their proposal. So those guys, they find these results. They compare just like 20 Chinese brain and 20 English speakers brain, and they say, okay, those two areas are larger for Chinese speakers. Maybe that's because of their language are much more complicated. That's their proposal. But
so we have size differences and then we just have processing differences.
Yeah, processing differences as well. However, those are many, like when you read Chinese characters or try to write something, in the speaking, like listening, when I try to say something, there's not such a big differences for English people and Chinese people.
So when you prompt your subjects to read something, the differences aren't as...
Yeah, not that big, that big. Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
But then when you make them read or do different tasks, you see that the brains go light up in different areas.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, wow.
So in my study, I focused on not the, like in general, you read or write. No, I focused on the properties of the language. So especially for Chinese, like your Chinese characters. So one of my dissertation research, we studied how the object nouns in Chinese. So you are learning Chinese, you know a little bit. For example, like for different vehicles in Chinese, okay, in English, car, train, bus, bike. So I have no idea they are vehicle in the word itself. Right. But for
Whereas
Chinese,
with the character,
in Chinese, your car is 汽车, train is 火车, bike 自行车,
bus 公共汽车,
taxi 出租车, they all have a
You're cheating.
We're not cheating.
No, I'm teasing.
That's our language. They give us this like huge advantage when you try to think about.
面包车.
Wherever you see a
it looks like bread car.
You know that vehicle. It's very easy. In our words, you know any vehicle in Chinese have a root of vehicle. So in my study, I just want to know whether this kind of linguistic cue of category like in Chinese characters, will help Chinese people processing all the natural category structure. So if all the objects in the word, maybe because Chinese language have this Q, they have much closer relationship.
They link things more readily in their minds. Whereas for me, I say turkey and peacock. Those two words have nothing to do with one another. Whereas in Chinese, 火鸡 and peacock.
Peacock like 孔雀.
孔雀. Okay. They both have the bird radicals in them.
Peacock don't have this one, but like
I found the
ostrich have this one.
An ostrich. Okay, it has G in it.
Yeah, have the bird one.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
that's really helpful.
I'm curious to know that with our increasing, whether or not with our increasing reliance on computers, because when you're typing something on a computer in English, you type as if you write, right? You're using the alphabet. Whereas in Chinese, you're typing in pinyin and you're getting a character to pop up on your screen. Because it would be impossible to have 33,000 characters on a keyboard, right?
It's possible. We have
it's possible.
Yeah, we have a different input method for Chinese characters.
But you're typing in pinyin for the most case.
Pinyins.
Which means that you're actually not going through the motions of drawing the character as much as in the past.
But you know, when we learn these characters, we learn these radicals in our primary school.
Right.
So we know how to write it.
No,
at least right now we don't use it like that often. But in reading, we still know that every characters have a bird radical belong to a bird.
Right, in reading them, but I mean the actual mechanical act of writing them. If you say that has, like you said, when you have somebody, when you have two, a native Chinese speaker and a native English person reading, you see the same lights go off. But if you ask them to write, different things go off because to write characters is more complicated. So if Chinese people lose the practice of writing characters over time because they're increasingly using computers and it's this pinyin input to get the character. So they recognize the character, they can read it, they know the radical, but they're not writing it.
Yeah, they're not writing, it's not practiced.
Maybe the brain is going to evolve somehow there.
That's a great question. I mean that's maybe my next study.
Okay, great. Sign me up.
yeah, indeed. So now in this study, the study you already done.
Yes, I was a part of the study, we'll just say. I was popped into an MRI for an hour. It was my first time in an MRI, and I was told that by your assistant that I was very lucky to have been in an MRI for the first time, which meant that I hadn't had any previous brain ailments, which I said, okay. And then I got in there and I was like, am I lucky? It's really small. Can I scratch? But it was a very fun experience, and I'm very curious to see the results of what an hour of probing my brain with a few questions, and my brain as well as that of several other native English speakers, what the results were.
Well, so in this study...
Are we freaks? What?
No, of course not. So in this study, we try to explore a different topic rather than like object nouns in Chinese and English.
Right.
We want to know like the kin terms in Chinese and English. Because we will know that it's different. It's totally different in English and Chinese. In English, we have only like 15 kin terms.
Right, we've got like mom, dad, sister, brother, and uncle,
daughter, son, uncle, nephew, niece, cousin, grandma, grandpa, grandchildren, like 15. We only have 15. But for Chinese, we have much more complicated one. Yeah, I can show you this one. So
I tremble.
We have more than 30.
Yes.
So in my study, I use 33 kin terms.
Yes.
So we distinguish age, whether older than me or younger than me. Like in brother and sister, we have older than me, Jie and Ge. Yeah. When we distinguish whether this is belong to mother's side or father's side. Maternal, so in English, it's just grandpa, no matter it's my mother's grandpa, my mother's father or my father's father.
Right.
But for Chinese, it's totally different. You can't get it wrong.
Right.
Yeah. If you are a child and you call it wrong, you will get like.
You'll get a. Really?
I mean, it's seriously. We Chinese people understand the relationship and we respect the relationship. You have to show your understanding of this relationship.
Is there a certain priority given to the paternal side? Or, I mean, at least traditionally?
Some terms, indeed.
Yeah.
For example, for uncle, we have 3 terms for...
Oh, gosh.
For uncles. So we have father's older brother, called Baba. And we have father's younger brother, called 叔叔, and we only one for mother's brother, 舅舅.
Oh,
So in this,
that's just slighting the mother's side.
we have more details for father's.
What if your father has twin brothers?
just two. You just have two brothers. Yeah, that's it.
Oh my goodness.
That's so. In Chinese, kin terms are really complicated.
Okay.
We distinguish age. We distinguish gender, we distinguish whether it's mother side or father side, and then we also distinguish whether you have a surname that's for cousin. So in English, it's all cousin.
Oh.
But in Chinese, those who have the same surname, like me, it's Tang. Yeah, whether it's older or younger, Tang Xiong.
They're all your cousins.
Yeah,
we
but
share the same last name.
Yeah, share the same name, have a different term for Tang.
Oh.
And those who don't share the same surname, we call it Biao. So I designed a study.
Yes.
Actually, you've done this one.
I've done this.
Okay, so in this study, we have 5 different elements and in 3 generations. So in this one is a grandparents generation, and this 2 is in the parent generation, and these 2 are children.
The children, right?
Children generation. So you just you have one queue, like in a red circle, and then your task is to call from the queue to a target.
Right.
So if, for example, for this one, this is the children generation, and this is a female in the parent generation.
Right.
So these children should call it her mother.
Mother, right.
Yeah. And in this one, it's your father's generation. This is male.
Right.
And his mother.
Right.
So it's your
She's your grandmother.
grandmother.
In
so
each instance, we were asked to identify the furthest relative from us.
Yeah.
So basically, you're in an MRI.
She knows
and
that.
well, I did it for an hour, and you can ask your assistant. I was rather slow in picking it up. I was like, wait, so I'm the red dot, and the lady, wait, how does this work? But no, once you do get it, it is rather intuitive, and you can see how it is pretty much foolproof. I mean, you can give it to a native English speaker, you could give it to a native Chinese
Yes.
speaker, and you can
And they
accurately measure the differences in their responses. So basically, you're in the MRI and you're asked to imagine that you are the red dot. So in level 1, you are the 3rd generation, right? You are the child. So the woman, the figure on top of you, she would be your mother. In the 2nd one, you are still the red dot, but and you're still in the 3rd generation. So above you, you have your father, and then you have your grandmother on top. But the answer in this instance would be grandmother, because you're always asked to say the furthest relative from you. But then in level 3, this is where you really get, you're able to analyze the differences in the speed of with which native English speakers and native Chinese speakers respond. Exactly. You are in the 3rd generation again. So the person on top of you is your dad. The person to the left of you is your aunt. Whereas a Chinese native speaker wouldn't just be able to say aunt. You would have to say...
This is Google.
Google.
Yeah.
See, I would just be like, ai?
Ai is different.
Right, it is different.
Yeah. Okay. So here we have the behavioral results. That is, we respond to this one, the time, how fast you respond to it.
Right. Because we were asked, okay, so we were in the MRI and we had a clicker and the prompt would show, and we didn't call it out or anything because you don't speak in an MRI. I don't know what happens.
That will influence the results because in the MRI, the key thing is you can't move.
You can't move.
Yeah.
I learned that.
You learned that. Yeah. We have a frame to help you.
Yes.
But if you speak, like you move your jaw, you might
mess up the result. Right. So you think the response in your head, and you say, okay, I hope this lights up something on the screen that will show them what I'm thinking about. You think it as hard as you can, and you hit a clicker as soon as you've finished, so that they can measure how long it takes you to respond to each one. And how many times did I do this? I was in there for about an hour, so I responded
to less than 400 trials.
Less than 400
Less than 400.
Okay.
Not that bad.
No, not that bad. But yeah, 400 is still a substantial number. I mean, you need enough.
Yeah, we need these trial numbers to analyze the data.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so here are the results.
So the blue bar is for English speaker, and the red bar is for Chinese speakers. So, and this is for A levels from parents and children, and this bar is sibling, and this bar is grandparents, grandchildren, uncle and aunt, nephew and niece, and 2 kinds of cousins.
Right, that's where it gets really fuda.
Yeah, you see, for the parents, children, and sibling, there's no behavioral differences between English and Chinese people because the parents and the children, the same.
Mom, dad.
The same. Mom, dad, 父亲, 母亲 for Chinese.
Right.
And for the sibling, a little bit of differences.
Little bit.
Because Chinese distinguish the age, whether you are older or
Older brother, younger brother.
Yeah.
But even that's simple enough. I mean,
Because just the position a little bit higher.
Right.
Yeah, and you don't have like that many.
and you tend to know your position within your family pretty well. Like, that's my little brother, and we're not going to confuse that.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
And it is in the grandparents and grandchildren and uncle, aunt that Chinese people have a hard time. So they have much higher reaction time.
Right.
The blue one is much higher compared with the
It took them much
the
longer.
red one.
The red one.
Yeah, the red one have much higher reaction time than the blue one. That's because in those 4 levels, they have to distinguish whether this guy is my mother's side or my father's side.
Right.
In English, just grandpa, grandma.
Right, that'll do it.
Yeah, that's it. And we have to, in Chinese people, you have to see whether this is my mother or my father, and whether it's my mother's father or it's my father's father.
Right.
Yeah, so that takes
You
them
need
much
to
longer.
think and
think
it takes
about
longer to
which
respond.
side. Yeah.
So this is proof that it really is. I mean, even though, as you mentioned
behavioral
before,
level,
there are different areas of the brain that we use to store our knowledge of kin.
In behavioral level, it's possible that it's that in the same area, just like different amount of activation in the same area, or it may be in different areas.
Yeah, totally different.
Yeah, it's possible. We have no idea if you only have brain data, have behavior data.
Right.
Right. That's just how fast you respond.
How fast.
You have an idea in the brain.
Right.
Yeah. So in the cousin level, obviously, Chinese people need to distinguish 8 different cousins. Poor Chinese
8
people.
different cousins.
Yeah, the English people are just
Who
cousin.
makes this stuff up? 33,000 characters, 8 types of cousins. Like,
But we
1.3 billion people doing all of this? I mean, come on.
Okay, that's behavioral. What happened in the brain?
Yeah, this is the good part.
Yeah,
What do
so-
all these red dots mean?
So here, it's the same brain, different viewpoint. So this is the right side of your brain, like this side.
Right? The right hemisphere.
And this one is the left side of your brain.
Right.
So it's your side here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Check it out.
Yeah, this one is from top down.
The top down.
This is anterior, this is posterior.
Okay.
So this is top down. And those red lights, it's about activations in your brain. So we use like complicated mathematics and to show.
I love complicated mathematics.
You love it?
They're my favorites.
Okay, we should scan your brain when you do such kind
No,
of
I am definitely, see this left brain right here, I am totally a left brain person, which means that I run away from complicated mathematics. I'm very much a language heavy person.
Yeah. So here you can see, this is for those brain areas lights up more for nephew, niece versus uncle and aunt.
Right.
So you can see the
This
top
is a
one is
Chinese
Chinese.
brain.
So you can see how many different areas lights up for Chinese people.
Right.
When they see nephew, niece, they need to distinguish nephew, niece, compared with just uncle and aunt, although it's different directions. So I can tell it's inferior frontal gyrus, middle frontal gyrus, superior frontal gyrus, and this superior parietal lobe.
And these are all areas that are responsible for language primarily, or?
Those in the frontal areas primarily is for language processing, and this superior parietal lobe is more like in number processing.
Okay.
Different levels of
So
things.
that would explain why it was activated, this number processing, because they were...
because the different levels
my
increased
goodness.
in the one.
Would that make? Oh, here's a crazy theory. Is this why Chinese people are so good at math? Because the basic act of speaking and of identifying their family members activates areas linked to. I'm going too far.
Well, that's interesting. We can test it.
I would love to. I mean, because Chinese people generally do have a reputation for
because
being
we have
very
much complicated kinships,
Yeah,
and we have to try to distinguish them.
You have 8 different cousins, so
we have to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
you have to count them, and the act of processing them further develops an area of your brain that's linked to mathematics. So it
that's interesting.
strengthens this area, which means that when you need to balance a checkbook or
We can call it a
do
Roseann
calculus,
hypothesis.
yeah, sure, go for it. I mean, I would be very curious to know. All of my
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, indeed, I would say this area, this superior parietal lobe, maybe indeed is responsible for some kind of abstract hierarchical structure in Chinese people specifically, because we have much more complicated hierarchical structure of kin terms.
Sure.
So Yeah, but for like in English, people they don't have this area.
We're kind of sleepy.
Yeah, it's easy, right? You just need the superior parietal lobe and the inferior frontal areas to
And these are both
distinguish between
language areas. They're not
Yeah,
at
they're
all
both language
computational areas.
Yeah. And this superior one is more like decision making
Okay.
or something. Yeah.
And that's also stimulated in the Chinese.
Yeah, it's in Chinese one here.
So you have to.
So the additional one for Chinese people is the middle frontal gyrus in the left,
which is more language.
which we already know in different literature is related to Chinese processing, Chinese character processing, and Chinese meaning. Remember the dyslexia story? Yeah, that's in the left and middle frontal gyrus.
Okay, which would explain why it wasn't stimulated for the English speakers. We don't have that.
You don't need it.
We don't have characters.
Yeah,
Do I have one yet? Can you check it out? I really want a little.
You have one, I think.
I want a little character processing area in my brain. That would help, me. That would make me much more productive.
Okay, I will go back and check
in China. Yeah, if you could look at my brain scans again and see if I have that.
In general, it's English people, they don't have such a complicated structure. So in the task, for them, they don't need additional brain regions. Remember our hypothesis? Whether it's more activation in one region, or you have to use different
regions, right?
So in here, we know for Chinese people, they need additional brain regions for their complicated kin terms.
Right. So it's not just more processing in the same regions; you're bringing in other ones. And I think it's because you've got to count. I really think you need to bring in the math, the little math area.
Okay. Let's see. Another thing is about our 8 different cousins.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. Indeed, we find differences between those 8 different cousins. So those who share the same surname with you.
This one likes pizza. This one's vegetarian.
So this one for the cousins who share different surnames, which means 表.
Right.
Yeah, in Chinese kin terms. Compare with those cousins who have the same surname as you, Tang. Yeah. You have many different brain areas for this. Like you have bilateral middle frontal gyrus, and you have again this area, this superior parietal.
Computational.
Yeah. So indeed, in those really complicated hierarchical ones, we need these 2 areas. Yeah, for Chinese people.
Well, this is great. I mean, it's proof that just speaking the Chinese language on a regular basis is very stimulating to your brain.
Yeah. I think this added more evidence to those literature that for Chinese people because of the property of language. Even to my own study for the object nouns, right? Because in our language we have our property. We can give you a cue about category. Now here we know in our language you have to distinguish 8 cousins.
Right.
And then you need different brain areas lights up to process those complicated things. Yeah, compared with English people, just cousin, that's it. Yeah, we can find it in the brain.
Which is really fascinating when you think that the brain is probably the only organ that has these cross-cultural differences. I mean, I don't know what's been done, but if you would imagine a native English speaker's heart and a Chinese speaker's heart, you would imagine that they function more or less in the same way, that our other organs function relatively similarly. I don't know how much has been done on transplants. I mean, if you can transplant a Chinese person's kidney into an American person, I don't know.
That's a totally different story. I don't know.
I tend to. I don't know what my brain does.
We should ask those daughters.
Yeah, but it's very fascinating that the brain is so different. And then, so this is in terms of kinship.
Yeah.
But what about verbs, for example?
Well, so I already had done the kin term nouns about objects.
Like
nouns
cars,
are like kin terms. And for Chinese verbs, there's also a very interesting story about Chinese verbs.
How do we complicate things now?
Yeah. So right now, there's a theory about how verbs are represented in the brain, right? So they have a proposal that different verbs, whether it's related to your hand, your mouth, or your foot, are represented differently in the brain according to the modal area of those body parts. So all those verbs related to your hand are represented. Throw, catch. You will activate it not only the language area of the brain, but also the modal area of the hand.
That allows you to do that.
Yeah, do the hand. And all the verbs related to a mouse will activate your mouth modal area. Yeah.
And this is only for native Chinese speakers or for everybody?
This study so far is only for English speakers.
Okay.
Yeah. For Chinese speakers, we have a different story because in English, all the verbs, whether it's related to a hand, foot, or mouse, have no cue. Again, we have no cue. Throw, push, like right,
There's no
grab,
common denominator that.
steer, yeah, no idea is belong to your hand. It's related to your hand.
Right.
And jump, kick, run.
Right.
Have
Nothing,
no cue.
you have
it's
no
related
idea
to
it
your
belongs
food.
to your foot.
But in Chinese, we have a radical. Maybe you will learn that most Chinese
show.
verbs related to your hand have a radical. Tells you that this action is
Has to do with
related
your
to your hand. And the most Chinese verbs related to your food have a radical. Tells you that this action is related to your food.
This is where you compensate for how complicated cousins are.
Indeed.
You have to balance things out.
Yeah, indeed. So when Chinese children, you can imagine when they learn the
English,
verbs,
they're like,
when they in English, yeah.
kick, I can understand.
In Chinese, we know any kick have this radical. We know it's related to my food. Even have no idea of what kind of action it is, but I know it's performed by the food. So this is the huge advantage again for Chinese people, right? They can easily learn actions when they just learn how to write the characters.
Write the character.
Yeah.
Ah, so by writing, okay, because those areas are linked
That's
in your
also
brain.
association is much
So if
stronger.
I write the character for throw many, many times, can I be like a world-class pitcher? Because
I
you
have
just
no
told
idea
me.
yet. I have no idea yet. We just finished the study.
Or I want to be a
Yeah.
soccer star, so I'm going to write and rewrite the character for kick.
I hope you can, but I don't know yet.
interesting.
So I'm just interested in whether this kind of cue, linguistic cue in verb, can influence the representation of Chinese verbs in the brain. It should be different because in English you have no cue that these verbs belong to these areas. So
Right.
you have to use those modal areas to represent these verbs. Right? But for Chinese people, we have this cue in language. We don't need those additional modal areas to activate it.
Right.
Right.
Well, that's when you're reading the word. But if
but
you're
not-
hearing the word, you no longer have a clue.
So it's different. It's different. So for all those cues, those radicals in Chinese characters, you have to learn how to write it, how to read it.
Right.
Right.
That's
then
instilled
you
from
can
the
read
very
it.
beginning.
Yeah, for the speaking, I don't know how big the influence would be.
Wow.
Yeah.
Perhaps we can use this information to find ways to improve the way Chinese students can study English.
Yeah.
Because if our languages are so intrinsically different,
Yes.
maybe we need to mimic the idea of this reinforcement through radicals and through cues in teaching English.
Ah.
Or maybe instead of, just making them memorize words, to learn the words for verbs, for example, make them do them. Because we know that Chinese students already have these links in their brain, so the radical is linked to the actual action. Make them, when they're studying the word throw, make them throw.
Yeah.
Instead of writing it. Maybe that would be a more effective way to teach
I'm sure
language.
that would be helpful, but yeah, I'm sure that would be
I don't think I'm
helpful.
going to sleep much tonight. I think I'm going to be thinking about this. My brain's going to be
will?
lighting up in all different directions.
Yeah, you should just learn more Chinese.
Yeah.
That will
Oh, yeah.
help you.
I need. Yeah. Can you
Yeah.
can you get back to me about that little area of my brain responsible for characters? I want to work that area out. I want to take
Okay.
some muscle supplements and really get that. worked out.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
We look forward to welcoming you another time. And that's it for this cerebral episode of Easy China. We hope we've clarified some of the differences going on in native English speaker and native Chinese speaker, the brains of native and I am not a native English speaker today. Thank you for watching.